COVID confusion, anger at mixed messages over new regional guidance to control the Indian variant. Local authorities claim they have been blindsided by changes to government advice, calling it local lockdown by stealth. The government denies that, but many seem baffled.
It's always different rules every 2 minutes with him. He changes it right now tomorrow.
To tell us at least. Maybe we didn't really know about it, did we?
You think the communications could have been a bit better?
A lot better, I think, yeah.
Also tonight, Islamophobia in the Tory party. A new report finds evidence of discrimination and calls for reform. Fighting child cruelty, the family of Tony Hudgell take their campaign for a harsher punishment to Parliament. And Hassani the handsome, the baby gorilla hand-reared by keepers, now happily settled with a surrogate mum.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. There is anger and frustration over new COVID guidance for areas in England worst hit by the Indian variant. Local authority leaders and MPs have strongly criticised the government for what they say is poor communication. They say new advice for people not to travel into and out of certain areas was not passed on to them. It was posted instead onto an official website on Friday, but only spotted last night. Here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan.
People in Bolton awoke to find their town not quite so welcoming as they had thought. The government advising against non-essential travel in or out of this and 7 other places. Do you have any plans to leave town in the next few days?
Yeah, I'm supposed to be going to Blackpool on 5th for my birthday, 5th
Are
of
you?
June.
Did you know the government is now advising against leaving
I
the
just
area?
heard, yeah.
What are you going to do?
I'm going to have to stay here, aren't I?
We were going to go to Manchester shopping, but the advice is not to, so we didn't.
So you changed your plans today?
Yes.
When did you know the advice had changed?
Probably early this morning.
Tell us at least. Maybe we didn't really know about it, did we?
You think the communications could have been a bit better?
A lot better, I think, yeah. It's quite poor, I think.
The guidance was actually changed on Friday, but no one here seems to have been told until last night. If local authorities don't know the specifics of government policy pertaining to their area, there has been a failure.
I don't know the ins and outs. I don't know why the local authorities don't feel that they've been informed along the way, because we have been hand in glove about raising the awareness about the issues, about the risks of being cautious and how we transmit this particular variant of the virus.
For the 8 areas where the Indian variant is spreading most quickly, advice appeared on the government website on Friday, telling people to meet outside rather than inside where possible, keep 2 metres apart from people they don't live with, and avoid travelling in and out of affected areas unless it's essential. A local MP says that information should have been properly announced.
To find this happened, sneaked out without telling anyone, I just think, they really are treating the people of Bolton with a great deal of contempt. How hard is it, or would it be, to let us know what they're planning to do?
Directors of public health in all 8 affected areas have now reiterated that Friday's revised guidance is just guidance, and there are no new legal restrictions or local lockdowns, which is probably just as well, seeing as no one knew about it. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Bolton.
Well, today's confusion came as the latest coronavirus figures show that cases are rising slightly again. And our health editor, Emily Morgan, is here. Now, look, Emily, there is particular concern, isn't there, in Bolton, where Carl was reporting from. What exactly is going on there?
Well, the hospital there, the Royal Bolton Hospital, has said that it is having to take action to deal with a surge in COVID patients. It put out a statement earlier to say that it's extremely busy and asking anyone who's thinking about using A&E to only go there if absolutely necessary. Now, currently, they have about 41 patients. 8 of those patients are in critical care. That is nowhere near the numbers of patients they had back in the peak. They had about 162, so it puts it into context, but it is still really worrying. And I think it acts as a reminder about why we're all being asked to be really cautious still. The hospitals in the other hotspot areas, so places like Bedford and Kirklees and Leicester, they're not seeing the same sorts of numbers of patients yet. They are still really small, but Bolton, of course, was one of the first places to detect the Indian variant, so you would probably expect the cases to be a little bit higher, and the worry is as cases increase, hospital admissions will also increase in those hotspot areas.
OK, Emily, you'll obviously be keeping an eye on that for us. Thank you very much indeed. Now, there is more trouble for Boris Johnson after an independent review into his Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. It found that comments about women wearing burqas made by Mr Johnson before he was Prime Minister were insensitive. And there was evidence too of discrimination, which it said the party must root out. But as our political reporter Shihab Khan explains, Muslim Tories say the report is a whitewash.
Can we clear left and right?
They were side by side during the London mayoral campaign in 2016, and now Zac Goldsmith and Boris Johnson's names are appearing together again. This time they're mentioned in an independent investigation into allegations of racism within the Conservative Party, which found, among other things, that Zac Goldsmith's mayoral campaign and Boris Johnson's previous comments show the party is insensitive towards Muslim communities. The report does, however, say the Conservatives aren't institutionally racist, something this former chair of the party doesn't agree with.
This is exactly why for many, many years I've led this campaign to say to the party that it needs to clean up its act, that it needs to have a root and branch clear out of racist views and Islamophobic views, whether they are held at the top by the Prime Minister or at the bottom by our members and volunteers.
The report found that 727 incidents were reported to the party between 2015 and 2020. 3/4 were to do with social media activity, and 68% of those complaints relate to anti-Muslim discrimination. The report recommends the party overhauls its complaints process, provides training for staff, and reaches out to communities like the ones here in East London.
I would have liked to apologise for anyone who has experienced hurt as a result of any discrimination, but it is a detailed and very thorough report, one which includes 27 recommendations, which we are going to accept in full.
Kishan Devani was a Conservative parliamentary candidate in 2015. He left the party a few years later and joined the Liberal Democrats after feeling uncomfortable over the treatment of ethnic minorities. He has doubts about whether this report will resolve the issue.
I'm a son of refugees. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror and support a party that decided to divide our country in the means that it's doing. And I think this report, sort of vindicates the rationale behind people like myself.
It is people like Kishan that the party will now want to convince that they will tackle this issue going forward. Shihab Khan, ITV News, Westminster.
Detectives are appealing for help over the shooting of the Black Lives Matter campaigner Sasha Johnson. The mother of two was shot in the head at a party in South London over the weekend. She remains in a serious condition in hospital, but police have rejected claims that she was deliberately targeted. Sergio Carrier is outside Scotland Yard now. So, Sergio, what exactly are the police saying there?
Well, as you say, Sasha Johnson, a Black Lives Matter activist and a political campaigner, is still critically ill in hospital after being shot in the head in the early hours of
Sergio Carrier at Scotland Yard. Thank you. Now, the adoptive mother of a boy who was told by his birth parents he had to have his legs amputated is supporting tougher new sentences for child cruelty. Tony Hudgell's parents were sentenced to the maximum jail term of 10 years after inflicting terrible injuries on him when he was a baby. Now, an MP is campaigning for a law in Tony's name, which would see life sentences for the worst offenders. Geraint Vincent reports.
6-year-old Tony Hudgell was one of the brightest lights of a very dark year last year. On his prosthetic legs, he walked 10 kilometres and raised £1 million for the hospital that saved his life. He's walking with his mum, Paula, here, who adopted Tony after his biological parents abused him so badly, his legs had to be amputated.
The pain, the neglect, it's just unthinkable what Tony went through.
Tony Smith and Jodie Simpson were found guilty in 2018 of causing or allowing serious physical harm to a child. After fracturing his legs, they were also found guilty of cruelty for not seeking medical help for the baby. They're expected to be released next year.
They can live their lives. They can go and start another family. They can go and do whatever they want and just carry on. It's just not right.
Current sentencing guidance allows a maximum 10-year sentence for child abuse causing serious physical harm, except where that abuse leads to the death of the child, when the maximum sentence becomes 14 years. The proposed amendment would see the guidelines increased to 14 years and life imprisonment, respectively.
Tony's law is extremely important, but actually it's a minor change. And the minor change is to bring into alignment the sentences for children and the sentences for adults. And that would give 14 years or life, depending on the gravity of the offence, bringing it into line with the kind of offences, the kind of sentences you'd see for an adult.
That was my favourite thing at school, actually.
Space.
This afternoon, Tony was in the playground telling his mum what he did at school today. His progress and achievements are already extraordinary. He might be about to change the law. Geraint Vincent, ITV News.
Still to come in the ITV Evening News, the impact of George Floyd's death a year on. We report from Bristol. Plus, Gareth Southgate tells us his plans to lift England's spirits this summer. Those stories and more after the break. Join me then. Welcome back. The family of George Floyd is to meet President Joe Biden in the White House later to mark a year since his murder. His death triggered international protests against police brutality and racism, and support grew for the Black Lives Matter campaign. Now, the impact was also felt here in the UK with a series of demonstrations, including one which saw the statue of the slave trader Edward Colston toppled from its plinth in Bristol. Sangeeta Lal is there ahead of a vigil later tonight. Sangeeta.
Well, this is exactly where that Black Lives Matter protest started in June last year, now the location of a vigil for George Floyd. Later this evening, a 9-minute silence will be held in his memory. Now, Bristol is deeply rooted in Britain's slave trade past, and we're about half a mile from where the statue of Edward Colston was pulled down, one of the most significant moments in this city's history. An explosion of anger ignited by George Floyd's murder in America. His final moments were watched across the world, and Bristol rose up. In the place of a slave trader stood a symbol of the Black Lives Matter movement, so powerful it briefly replaced the statue of Edward Colston, now immortalised through a mural.
The murder of George Floyd and watching that, seeing it, and the emotions that I felt was, i.e. being a black woman and not being valued, being unrepresented. Regardless of whether it's in America, whether it's in the UK, you know, these are my people of colour, and I will stand with them and march with them and fight against racism.
What has changed over the last year for you?
For me personally, I don't think anything has changed. I think what it has done is given people a voice, and people have started to have very uncomfortable conversations.
Conversations that community leaders are having in schools. For years, Lawrence has been educating younger generations about racial discrimination. Now, though, he says attitudes are changing.
We're making the change. So we're being the change that we wanted to see. We're creating the educational resources to enhance the curriculum. It's kind of crazy. that you're still hearing the same conversations, and I'm having the conversations now with young people that I was having with elders 30, 40 years ago.
What do you want to see change?
What I've wanted to see for a long time before this has all happened, and I'd like just to see accountability for the failings that we witness daily.
I think that's what irritated not just black people, white people, everyone. So people want to see a change of humanity.
In this walking group, women encourage each other to speak out about racism.
It's good, you know, because it's recognising that, you know what, stuff like this does happen, and we've got to stop brushing it under the carpet.
So you're hopeful?
I feel hopeful. So there was a lot of change there. I just feel hopeful, and I just, you know, people becoming more friendly.
George Floyd's death led to change never seen before in Britain. After years of feeling silenced, many say their voices are now being heard. But the conversation's just getting started. Sangeeta Lal, ITV News.
In other news, the Conservative MP Rob Roberts has been suspended by the party after complaints panel found he'd broken Parliament's sexual misconduct policy. They found the MP had made repeated and unwanted sexual advances towards a male member of his parliamentary staff. He also faces a 6-week suspension from the Commons. And tributes have been paid to the first man to receive the coronavirus vaccine who has died from an unrelated illness. 81-year-old Bill Shakespeare received his jab last December whilst at hospital in Coventry. The England manager Gareth Southgate has named his provisional squad for the Euros, which kick off on June the 11th. Excitement is building ahead of what's now effectively a home tournament for England. Gareth Southgate told our sports editor Steve Scott he wants to give the fans something to cheer about after a very tough year.
It's nearly that time when the hopes of a nation rest on Gareth Southgate's shoulders again. His preparations, he tells me, not helped by a last-minute decision to delay naming his Euro squad due to injuries and 2 major European finals.
On the one hand, that's brilliant for the experience of our players to play in those big matches, but it's very complicated for us. I've talked to some of the other managers in the tournament and they're sort of giggling to themselves at the problem we've got and thinking they're stars, it's not them really.
Southgate says since the World Cup in Russia, many of his squad have won club trophies and titles, so will be better placed to succeed this summer. In addition, it is effectively a home tournament.
You don't get the opportunity to perform very often at international level in major tournaments in your own country. We all remember 2012, we remember Euro 96, and they were special things to be involved with. So a shame we won't have full houses at the start, but we will have some fans back, so we've got to make the most of that advantage.
He's also mindful that the country has never been more ready to celebrate after such a desperate year.
Everybody's suffered, haven't they? That is an opportunity. It's not a competitive advantage for us because the rest of the world have also suffered, so we're mindful of that. But we want to help our country, people put a smile on people's faces, and that's part of the joy of watching the national team.
In a week's time, Gareth Southgate will make 7 difficult phone calls when he trims his squad and settles on the players he's convinced have the potential to make European history in an England shirt. Steve Scott, ITV News.
And finally tonight, the baby gorilla who has a special bond with his keepers at Bristol Zoo. Hasani, which means handsome in Swahili, had to be hand-reared after his birth mother struggled to raise him, but staff feared it meant he wouldn't be able to join the other gorillas. Thankfully, though, there is a happy ending, as our correspondent Rupert Evelyn reports.
The nervous cries of a young lowland gorilla calling for his mother. At 9 months old, each step for Hasani is tentative, but he's not alone for long. Nerves are quickly calmed when Kira, his adopted parent, returns. All is good now, but life for this infant whose birth mother was unable to care for him has been fragile.
We needed to take Hasani away and hand rear him. But of course, with any gorilla and any great ape, you want to get them back with their own kind as soon as possible. The last thing you want is them to be imprinted on humans. So it was really important for us to try and get him back in the group as soon as possible.
Good lad. Human intervention is a last resort, but without it, he would almost certainly have died.
Even at night, we would stay with him, we would sleep with him to make sure he maintained that kind of physical aspect with us. So it's quite an intense process.
Introducing the youngster to his surrogate mother was understandably delicate and ultimately successful.
She's still learning, you know, she kind of forgets him occasionally, and you have to go, you know, Kira, don't forget the baby. And she does come back and she scoops him back up. But equally, you know, if he's not happy, he makes a noise, you know, he cries and hoots, and she comes back and picks him. She says, oh yeah, that's right, I've forgotten something.
The bond between the pair is strong. And although they're both a little wary of the attention, it hasn't stopped what is clearly a loving and growing relationship. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Bristol Zoo.
Oh, a story to make you smile. That's it. Tom's here at 10 from me and all the team. Bye-bye.